Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Last time I talked about my entire story as an attractions cast member in Tomorrowland, as well as some of my crazy guest interactions while working Autopia. If you're interested in watching those, a card probably just popped up to see a playlist of all the other videos. Just a reminder, these are also available in podcast form for those that want to listen to this on the go through the YouTube Music app as well. Anyway, this video will be covering the guest interactions I had while working at my second attraction of Monorail. For those unaware, I learned Monorail back in February of 2020, all the way till my eventual departure in December of 2023. I was also a lead at this attraction from October 2022 to March of 2023, so this video will combine both stories I had as a regular cast member, as well as the stories I had as a lead for that short 6 months. Now, I learned this a month before the park shut down for the pandemic, so I have a sliver of this video covering that and the eventual reopening of the monorail, as I was part of the reopening crew. Other than that tidbit, this video won't be in any chronological order, as I was also at my other two attractions off and on. Now, as always, this video will be sectioned off into chapters, and timestamps should be available on the video itself or in the description for those who want to skip around. Another thing to keep in mind is that this video and the series are meant for listening purposes. While I will have somewhat related B-roll footage playing, I obviously couldn't record my job, so this is just narration. So I do apologize for those expecting an animation with the clickbaity thumbnail. Lastly, I do recommend having somewhat of a basic understanding of the attraction, and a card should have also popped up that explains the surface level operations of this attraction. Anyway, without further ado, I present to you my guest interaction stories from the monorail. Pre-pandemic guests. Let's just knock this out of the way before I get into the meat and potatoes of the video. I can tell you from my experience that the guests weren't as crazy as they were post-pandemic, but I do have a small handful of stories from some unruly guest interactions. Let's start off with the nose and tail cone stories. A long time ago, we used to let passengers ride up front in the cabin with us, or in the back of the train in the tail cone. Just keep in mind, most of the unruly guests were just upset because of our safety policy. Only 4 guests up front and 6 guests in the back. This goes for all guests, including babies, so cast members and service animals did not count into that factor. Basically, we would have that one upset party every few days or so that got mad that their party of 14 had to be split up when they all wanted to ride in the back, or the famous, there are 4 guests and a baby. The baby still counts as a person whether they like it or not. Now, it's nothing like them throwing things or cussing us out, but just visible frustration. I understand where they're coming from, but that's just the safety rules, and I want my audience to be aware of this, if it ever comes back. I also had a whole chapter on my surface level operations on the nose and tail cones that pretty much gave my speculation on why it won't come back. Yeah, that speculation was pretty much true, but management will give some sorry ass excuse of why it won't come back, but that's for another day. Just for legal reasons on my end. Just keep in mind that my speculations, while I said were pretty much true, they are not official reasons. So they're unofficial from a former cast member, but they are not officially stated by the company or their management team. Just wanted to throw that in there in case any lawyers are listening to this. Let's get back on track, or the rail. Oh, nobody's laughing. Okay, well then, I have both an operational story that's sort of a guest story. It was my second day signed off at the monorail, and I had a dad and his 2 boys come up front with me at the downtown Disney station. Basically, his kids were asking a bunch of typical kid questions during the ride back, and eventually we made our way to that long straightaway from Small World to Matterhorn. Well, ducks and seagulls like to hang out on the beam in that area, and 90% of the time, they will move once we approach with the train. We are trained to just keep going and honk our horn, if needed, to scare off any brave ducks or birds. You can see where this is going. Well, we are slowly approaching this duck that did not want to move. The dad was like, "You're not gonna hit the duck, right?" And then I was like, "Nah, they normally move." Well, the duck did not move. You can feel the slight ba-bump as we ran over that poor duck. I was mortified, and the 2 little boys were screaming because not only did I just run over this duck in front of them, but the dad was just laughing at the fact that I actually ran over this poor duck. I legitimately thought the duck was going to move because 99% of other birds just skeet out of there once they hear the loud blaring horn. Well, then I had to call in a code Donald over the radio to my lead, and let's just say we were down for the next 30 minutes while they had to remove the duck remains. I still feel bad about hitting that duck, but I think it was just ready to go. Anyway, on to a different topic. This is an indirect story, but happened to one of my coworkers while I was at the position that's in charge of the attraction. He had a family up front with him, and I guess during his travel, one of the little boys up front slammed on the emergency stop button that is next to the driver's console when my coworker was talking with his parents. I had to respond to this and let our maintenance team know that it was a self-inflicted e-stop, but easily recoverable, but still. The parents did apologize for that, but just a note, don't let your kids sit next to the driver so they don't reach over and touch any of the buttons. Also, though I shouldn't have to state it, do not touch any of the buttons unless you work there and are on the clock. I've had a handful of e-stops happen at this attraction because teenagers thought they were funny. Speaking of teenagers, this happened at the downtown Disney station. I was at the position at the end of the platform and a train was slowly approaching. Basically, it was about to round the Lego store soon. Well, this teenage boy ran up the exit stairs and the ticket takers were yelling at this dude to stop. I turned around and this kid pretty much was at the tippy top and then had the balls to run and jump onto the beam while the train was coming in. Mind you, you could see the train's nose peeking out from behind the Lego store, so it's not like it was close enough to hit the kid if the train came to a full stop, but it was still close enough if the train didn't, hit the brakes. This was the first time I've ever slammed the e-stop button. I ran so fast to the button, and luckily the train stopped, as that button cuts off all the electricity to the beam for that section of the track. After that, I yell at this kid, and his buddies are all laughing at him for being an idiot. Luckily, nobody was recording him doing this stupid act because it was before that brain rot TikTok app was a popular thing. The kid jumped back over, and I walked him over to the elevator exit and told him to wait there until someone could talk to him. He apologized to me over and over again because he was trying to be funny in front of his homies. Now, being nice, I basically had a short talk with him myself and told him no amount of funny is worth dying over. Like seriously, he did apologize when security did eventually show up. From what I believe, he didn't get banned from the park, but we did tell him he wasn't welcome at our attraction for the rest of the day and to behave and not do something stupid like that again. I think he did learn a valuable life lesson that day. Now, just to reiterate, please do not touch any of the buttons or jump onto the beam. The safety rules are in place for a reason, and breaking them will most likely get you a ban. Now, remember, I no longer work for the company, but I still want to make sure I stated it for legal reasons. Don't act like a fool, and don't touch anything or go anywhere you aren't supposed to. Alright? Cool beans. That's going to wrap it up for this chapter, as guests weren't as wild or daring until after we reopened. So let's go ahead and move on to the post-pandemic stories. These range from October 2021 to December 2023. Let's start with reopening. Closing at 7 p.m. From reopening the attraction in October of 2021 to about mid-August of 2022, the monorails were only open from park opening to 7 p.m. every single night. So even if the park closed at 8 p.m., we always closed at 7 p.m. Now, I'm going to side with the guests a little bit because this wasn't stated anywhere but at the monorail. So if you were on the monorail at all during the day, you knew that we closed at 7 p.m. But for those who didn't, they would show up to an empty station. Unfortunately, we did make pleas with our management team to get a sign made to inform guests of our early closure, or at least add it to the app. This never happened, but at least we did get a sign at both stations that let guests know that they had to fold their strollers. So that's a small win, I guess. Another thing that I need to mention is that the trams were also still not running, so guests had to walk to the parking structure for those who parked in it. We were a good mid-ground as we dropped off about a block away from the parking structure, and the walk wasn't as far. When we did reopen, we started to get more of an influx than we used to. This led to more and more people learning about the monorail, but of course, not everyone knew that we closed at 7 p.m., so when the park closed at 10 or later, it was a big letdown for those who didn't want to make the trek back to the parking lot. Yeah, unless you knew, you knew. So, I do side with the guests on this one, and we made sure to inform everybody as much as we could when we started doing our one-way trips and such. Now, where I don't side with the guests is when they start acting crazy about this and doing abnormal things that only a toddler would do if they don't get that cool toy at the store. Like grown adults throwing temper tantrums because they'd never been told no in their life before. Yes, adults older than me, acting like a 2-year-old. Granted, about, I would say, 80% of our problems would have been solved with a sign and/or notification in the app, but our management team wouldn't budge on that because it's unprofessional or some stupid excuse. Now, I'm not going to dog on my former managers that hard because some of them were great. And also, this video is about guests, so let's get back to that. One of the positions at the end of our operations is tasked to inform that we are, closing soon, and that one-way trips are the only thing that we currently offer. We would then close the chain, stand there until the last train had made its radio call on its way to get, put away. Basically, when the last train leaves Tomorrowland for the night, we would drop that position. So, we would be down there for about 10 to 15 minutes after we closed at 7 p.m., having a bunch of guests come up and wonder why we were closed. Most were like, oh, okay, but others would get full-on Psycho Karen on us. It was starting to get to the point where we started to have 2 cast members down at the position because of how malicious and insane these guests were acting towards us. Granted, this wasn't an every night occurrence, but it was more common for my coworkers that didn't really have the backbone to stand up for themselves. I remember this one night when I was down at this position with another one of my coworkers, and this guy came up. I could already tell that he was visually frustrated about something, and his family was following from behind. My coworker gave this guy the bad news that we were closed, 5 minutes ago. Well, if you can guess what happened, next, this guy screamed in her face, calling her all sorts of names, and just full-on verbally assaulting her. I then stepped in and told this guy that we were closed and he just needed to get over it. He, of course, directed his attention at me, and basically screamed in both of our faces. I told him again, if you have a complaint, you can go make it with guest relations. The man's wife basically stepped in and told him to settle down and apologized to both of us for his temper. He then stormed off screaming profanities, and we didn't see them again. This was a weekly occurrence with some big man-baby throwing a big man-baby fit for the first few months when we reopened. It started to become public knowledge that we closed early via social media and word of mouth. Not from the company, but just from other guests and bloggers who covered Disney. It started to chill out after a few months, but the downside is that these interactions were the final straw for some of my coworkers. That night, my coworker ended up putting her 2 weeks notice in. So not only was Monorail short-staffed, but we were losing more and more people every week due to extreme aggressions from angry guests with a fragile masculinity. Now, speaking of throwing fits, there was another occurrence where I was down at the position by myself, and this lady, probably mid-40s, comes up to me, and I delivered the bad news to her. She didn't yell at me, but she started pouting like a kid. She then started begging me that she didn't want to carry all her bags back to her car, and that she needed to get on the trains right now. Well, literal moments later before she arrived, the last train had already left for the night, and I was about to drop my position for the night. I apologized to her again, and she did the unthinkable. Now you may think, oh, she ran past me and tried to get up on the platform or something insane like that. No, she threw herself down on the ground and started screaming like a toddler. Everything fell out of her bags, of course, and I just looked at her. I then said, I don't have the patience to deal with this. I need to go clock out. So that's exactly what I did. I went up to the station, clocked out, and left. Oh yeah, just to let y'all know, she was still laying there when I was leaving. She was just sobbing and having a mental breakdown. Now, I did feel bad that I couldn't do anything, but there's a point where if you can't handle bad news, maybe you shouldn't go to a place where attractions are subject to availability. A few guests came up to me as I was leaving and were concerned for this lady that was just acting like a 3-year-old. I told the guest that she was just making a scene because she can't handle a train being closed for the night, and left because I was done with my shift. I still wonder how long that lady was laying there after I left, because she just had to be dramatic because, I lit her house on fire or something. I mean, that's at least how she was acting. This last story is an indirect story, but one that affected our operation. During normal operations, the downtown station would stop letting guests in about 30 minutes prior to park closing. Now, since the monorail closed at 7 p.m., they stopped letting guests in at 6:30 p.m., even though the park closed later in the evening. Well, after about 2 weeks of being reopened, we ended up changing that rule and now allowed guests up to 7 p.m. at both stations, but it was only one-way trips prior to that as always. The reason the downtown station closed with Tomorrowland is because of some grown lady throwing a fit, and apparently she was throwing hands at the poor ticket takers. So, just so this wouldn't happen again, we ended up making that slight change to our operation. Just to finish this off, As of recording this, the monorail is back to a normal style of operation and now closes with the park. The exception is special events, as it closes with normal day guests and doesn't operate during special events. Basically, the downtown station closes 30 minutes prior to park closing, and one-way trips during this time. While I don't expect this to change anytime soon, just know how it always was and how it always will be. Just don't throw any hands at the cast members over it, please. Mask up. On top of us closing early, the monorails are technically an indoor attraction, and they required everyone to wear masks. I believe this ended in April of 2022, but we still had to enforce this rule. We didn't stop any trains because some dingus having it as a chin diaper, but we still had to make sure everyone was wearing it and, go through our cameras to make sure everyone was following our guidelines. Now, you can only imagine the headaches and delays this caused for our operation because of people's beliefs and them not wanting to follow basic rules. I also want to add on that this was a big reason that, they stopped letting people sit up front and in the back of the monorails, for obvious reasons. I will have a whole section in the video talking about the crazy complaints I got from people that couldn't sit up front, but I won't be covering in this chapter of the video. Basically, passengers were allowed in the regular cabins, and that's how it still is, minus wearing the mask part. If anyone worked any customer service jobs during this time, they know the headaches of getting people to wear masks. I'm not going to cover it, why you should and why you shouldn't, and the whole politics behind it, but just know it was a nightmare for anyone in customer service, Disneyland included. If you were wondering, most indoor attractions had their own stash of masks for those who, didn't have it, so we just give them out like candy. If it tells you anything, as we were closing the doors up, we also had to do a mask check. I can tell you pretty much every other dispatch we had someone not wearing a mask, or just not wearing the one that they had on properly, so we then had to delay our operations to tell them to put one on or give them a new mask so they can ride the attraction. It was a huge waste of time and a huge delay to our operations for those that didn't want to participate. Now, to let you know, we did spiel this before boarding, and we did have a sign that masks were required. Guess logic though, well technically it's outside, but they don't realize that they're inside a cabin with a dozen other people. You get the bigger picture, and I don't really have to get into too much detail about this. I personally never dealt with anyone yelling at me about it, but I did get a lot of scoffs or swearing under their breath. The only terrible encounter that I had of this whole mask thing was this dude at the downtown station. He was on his phone bragging to one of his friends that he had COVID and he just came to Disneyland because who cares? Well, he was not only scaring other guests, but he was being loud enough where I could hear him. Even if he wore his mask inside, I told him he wasn't allowed on the attraction. He then gave me this sob story that he was just joking around, and I told him that I don't care. He was scaring other passengers, and I told him that if he wanted to go back to Disneyland, he can walk to the main gate, or else he can just have a chat with security. He ended his call real quick and left. To wrap up this chapter, my coworkers did have to kick people off for not wanting to follow this rule, and we did have issues on the daily with idiots not wanting to wear their mask. I understand that it sucks having to wear a piece of cloth on your face, but at the same time, you had to acknowledge the rules when you bought your ticket, so I don't feel bad for you that you can't just read. Lastly, for anyone that did work in customer service during this time, I am so sorry for the unruly people, and I understand your pain. Now, the rest of the video will be somewhat scattered in terms of dates, but I just wanted to get those two things out of the way that I know validated guest complaints. Now let's move on to the fun stories. No more nose, no more tail. Unfortunately, they no longer offer riding up in the front or back as of recording this. Will this change in the future? My hunch is most likely not, due to Tomorrowland's management and other excuses. But this just left the cast with getting bombarded with this question all the time, and some guests were getting less understanding than others. So I will be telling you some of the quotes that I got from crazy people for the first part of this chapter. This lady asked to sit up front when we were still requiring masks, and I told her, for obvious reasons. She then said, "Oh yeah, it's because of Joe Brandon and the Libbies that we can't have nice things anymore." Yes, lady, the president of our country is the reason you can't sit up front with the drivers at Disneyland anymore. Not Disney management themselves. That would also be a good name for a band though. Another guy came up to me and told me, "COVID isn't real. The reason you don't let us sit up there anymore is because you don't want us hitting on the hot chicks that drive the monorail." I mean, they don't need Creepo McGee trying to hit on the poor cast members half his age. Another one was this lady who told me, "Jesus Christ would let me sit up front with you guys, and that would be the Christian thing to do. Well, I told her, unfortunately Jesus isn't working today, but you can try again if you do eventually see him. Savage burn. The next quote isn't really a guest complaint, but just a common misconception that I couldn't talk about in my surface level operations. People say the reason we don't let passengers sit up front anymore is due to the monorail crash. Well, it's not the reason at Disneyland, but it is the reason at Disney World. There was a crash at Disney World that was, due to negligence on the cast members' part, as well as one of their managers, but I don't work there, and I don't know exactly what happened, so please do not quote me on that. As far as I know, and as a former pilot, please stop bringing that up to cast members at either resort. It's not something that they want to hear, and I want to hear, and no, this isn't the reason at Disneyland. Just stop asking about it. Let's go back to some more quotes that I have. This one guy kept pestering me about sitting up front. He kept telling me that COVID was made up by the Democrats, or something stupid like that. I told him I don't care what Kool-Aid he is drinking, he can't sit up front. He then told me that he knew the real reason, and it is that we all don't shower and they don't want passengers to smell our body odor. Yes, dude, totally. Whatever gets you to stop asking. Last but not least is the quotes of my personal favorite. This one guy told me that the guests weren't allowed to sit in the back anymore as it's been converted into a bathroom, and that's where we can go when we need to use it when driving the train. He told me he saw it on TikTok and he can understand that people don't want to smell that aftermath in the tail cone anymore. Well, that one was the icing on the cake for me. Pack it up, guys. We just pop open the roof hatch and the nose cone, run along the top of the train, hop in the tail cone's hatch, and go number 2. All while the train is driving itself, of course. Shaking my head, dude. People and their freaking brain rot app. The last story of this chapter is an indirect incident. I was in the train heading back to Tomorrowland, and basically was told to hold before entering the station due to a guest issue. Well, that guest issue turned out to be some lady who let herself into the nose cone. She watched us open it up and did it herself, planning herself up front. Apparently, she said she wasn't going anywhere unless she got to stay up front because she didn't want to ride with the normies. I literally had to hold for almost 30 minutes because this lady was throwing a fit and didn't want to move from the nose cone, all while I'm talking to my full train and apologizing them for the then delay. A lot of angry people for that, and I was only informed of the situation after the fact. Apparently, the reason she wanted to be up front was to get a video for social media, and she wasn't taking no for an answer. All I know is she eventually came out on her own, but she did have a nice chat with security for holding up her operations. I can only imagine the frustrations with my coworkers that went through that, trying to get this dumb lady to, leave. I don't understand why people have this fixation on getting that sweet clip for the gram or whatever. It's just as bad as those people that talk about their Disney stories on YouTube in hopes of getting views. Oh wait. Anyway, the next chapter is going to be about social media. I know that sounds crazy, but god damn, will you guys shut the hell up about what you saw on TikTok or Instagram Reels or Facebook or whatever else, people use to find fake news on. Unless it is from an official account, do not believe what these idiot influencers tell you. Social media. While the monorail isn't the most popular attraction in the resort, we do get a lot of influencers that come aboard, whether it be to live stream, record a video, or whatever else. Since I no longer work for the company, let's go ahead and rip this band-aid off. If you watched my surface level operations video on the monorail and noticed how I sort of showcased a certain YouTube creator on my nose and tail cone segment, well, social media is a big part of why the nose and tail cone are no longer a thing. We were loading the tail cone for a hot second when we did reopen, but a bunch of vloggers came in and recorded all the technical issues that our trains were having. Granted, they had every right to do that, but at the same time, we were not ready to open with all the technical issues that we were still having. Well, from what I picked up, a bunch of vloggers said a bunch of bad stuff about the operational side that day, and management said no more of this. And that's fair. Yes, Disney is aware of social media and all the stuff people say about the parks. They have a whole team apparently dedicated to scouring the internet for any sort of publicity. They do hear your complaints, but the best way to get it across is by actually contacting them directly. Now, negative publicity will result in things getting fixed and or taken away in this case, especially if it is a bigger creator. Personally, the reason I do bring up the nose and tail cone a lot is because I actually enjoyed giving guests that experience, but unfortunately, it would be tainted with all these people and their mom wanting to go up there because record yourself, because if you ain't recording it, it ain't happening. Don't quote me on the Disney Media Ninjas thing, but I know a few of my managers did mention it when they had a team or something like that that deals with publicity on that end. Moving on from that, the week we finally reopened, we had a ton of vloggers come up to the monorail recording us and all the problems we had. If you actually look up some of those POVs or other vlogs from that time, you can actually see me in some of those videos doing a dumb pose every time I saw someone filming. Not that it's really, a guest complaining section, but I just wanted to bring it up before moving into my disdain for social media when it comes to this attraction. So many guests would come up to us and try to tell us that the monorail goes to Galaxy's Edge. I don't know which influencer said that, but they need to be slapped. Hard. We got this so many times and we still do. The monorail only has 2 stops, Tomorrowland and Downtown Disney. Please do not believe what you see online. Speaking of online, why do you all gotta record yourselves being stupid? I have an instance where I was driving the train and my coworker told me to keep an eye on my third cabin. Well, I check it out and there's 3 women doing a dance of some sort while standing in the train while it's in motion. Like, are you ladies seriously recording a TikTok dance video while the train is in motion? I then get on the intercom and tell them that I shouldn't have to tell adults to sit down. They immediately stopped with their dumb little dance and didn't get up again. Hey, you remember how I told you about teenagers being stupid? Well, there's this one instance of a teenage kid and his buddies recording themselves trying to hang outside the window. They weren't fully outside the window, but they were sticking their entire torso out with their arms and head out of the window while the train was in motion. I was scrubbing through my cameras and saw this one kid laughing and recording the other genius who was holding onto his buddy while trying to get more and more out of the window. I then yelled at them over the intercom and saw the 2 dumb kids inside the cabin stop laughing immediately. They then pulled their friend back in and I made my way back to the downtown station. As we entered the station, I could see them get up again and try to do it again, but I radioed my coworker to not open up their cabin when I came in. So my coworker obliged, and as I came to a stop, I walked over to their cabin when I was parked and everyone was heading out. I looked at the genius that was hanging outside the window and asked him if he had fun. He sort of just looked down and I looked at the guy who was recording. He then told me that they were just having fun and I told him it's not safe for them, to do what they just did. And recording themselves for online consumption isn't a smart move. I then recommended to them that, don't upload that video. I then asked them to leave and not return to our attraction for the rest of the day. They understood and sort of shuffled away as I opened their doors. The one thing that we're told at our jobs is that safety is number 1. I know I've probably said it before, but just because it's Disneyland doesn't mean you won't get hurt. Cast members are trained to do things safely, and when guests ignore these safety rules, unfortunately consequences may occur, the best being you kicked off the attraction. Seriously, don't do things that are unsafe and don't record yourself doing it because it's going to get used against you in court if you were to sue the company. This just goes for anything. Record yourself doing something stupid, it's going to have negative effects in, your favor. Always. This last story isn't directly a negative guest complaint, but one I do feel, but it's sort of just one that, somewhat happened to be directly about me. Well, on October 8th of 2023, I was heading out of the Tomorrowland station and on my way to Downtown Disney. Everything seemed as normal. There was this guy actually live streaming with a recording rig on my train, but other than that, just leaving the station as normal. Well, my tail cone barely passes the trees, and my train is riding alongside the Harbor Boulevard, when suddenly, the power to the beam just died. This happened a few times already during the day, but this time, it was different. The power to the beam unfortunately couldn't be restored, and I had somewhat of a full train of passengers. Well, little did I know, some guy was actually live tweeting about this, and I just happened to be the driver. Now, I've been stuck on the trains like this almost 24 times, so this didn't really bother me. The part that bothered me is when we were stuck in the sun and my passengers were cooking because the sun was beaming down where, we were at. There was no shade. Sorry to my audio-only listeners, but I will be putting up the tweets of the event, and you can see how frustrated this guy was. Basically, we were out there for a good hour until we were finally towed back to the station, which was just a few dozen feet away. I completely sided with the guests on this one, but it was just weird having a guest live tweet about the incident, and I just happened to be the driver. Now, the only reason I found this was because I was actually looking for some downtime clips on social media to use for my surface level operation video on the monorail, and just happened to find this one complaining about the experience. It gave me a good laugh though, and I wanted to share it with you guys. Also, if the guest who live tweeted about me happens to find this video, I'm sorry that you were stuck on the train for an hour, and I'm sorry for your 4 later pass sort of sucked. Unfortunately, that's just Disneyland for you nowadays. Let's go ahead and move on to the next few chapters, and these ones that made me sort of angry with how people acted with certain things. You can probably guess where this is going, especially since I had a whole chapter dedicated to it on my surface level operations video. Strollers. Strollers are the goddamn bane of my existence when it came to working the monorail. I was not the only person who hated strollers, and I'm going to go on a rant here. I understand that having strollers at Disneyland is fine, and I get your kids need to have them at the park. Completely understandable. I have a kid myself, and I understand the stroller aspect 100%. Now, can you tell me this? Why is it so goddamn hard to fold up your goddamn stroller? We literally spiel about it before getting in, we have signs everywhere, and since we technically are a transport attraction, why do you assume it's fine? If you can't fold it, or don't want to, then don't go on the monorail, you dingus. This was the biggest delay of operations, was guests having the hardest time comprehending that no fold equal no ride. On top of that, most people would just bring their stroller on and were doing a round trip with it. Like seriously, you couldn't have just left it in Tomorrowland? But since they can technically take their stroller, it's a gray area that we can't really enforce. Trust me, I understand that it sucks leaving your stroller behind, but make sure you take your valuables with you at minimum. The other can of worms is those who had special tags that indicated that their stroller was acting as a wheelchair. Absolutely nothing against the people that did use these, but it was just another headache when we had some Karen fold up her stroller and then they see that this wheelchair stroller doesn't have to. Then that Karen would yell at us and possibly yell at the poor people that were using that tag. You get the idea, and I'm only going to share a handful of experiences that I've had with strollers because I literally could make an entire novel about my beef with strollers, and I'm not the only one either. This was a daily occurrence happening up to a few dozen times a day. Seriously, ride the monorail for an hour or just hang out in one of the stations and watch how many times these damn strollers cause a delay for sending out the trains. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started off with my favorite story with a stroller. It was getting closer to the evening side, and my coworker and I are opening up the gates. This dude and his family have a big old stroller. I know one of us told him to fold it up before boarding, but we just watched as he tried to get this big stroller into the cabin. It got to the point where the other dude in his party tried to help shimmy it in from the inside. It was like watching two guys try to, get a couch to a door, but with no luck. They literally were turning the stroller all around with stuff flying out from the bottom every time they tipped it over. Yeah, it was delaying our operations, but my coworker and I just watched in amusement as their problems would have been solved if they just folded it. Eventually, I went up to this guy and said, maybe it would be easier if you guys, folded it? The dude who was on the outside was all amazed and never thought of that option. He then folded it up, and guess what? It fit in the train just fine! Wowie zowie! Then I closed up the doors as the train was ready to leave. Then my coworker taps me on the shoulder to have me look at inside that cabin, and the two geniuses were unfolding it again inside the train as it was leaving the station. We just looked at each other and laughed. I actually called the other station when the train got there, and you can probably guess it, they were trying to get it out unfolded again in all its glory. Luckily, my coworker at the other station let them know that they had to unfold it, and they didn't struggle as much getting it out. Idiots. Now you're probably wondering how stupid people can be. Well, you're in luck because it's just going to get better from here. This was a common occurrence with idiots, and we had to get to the point where we just had to tell parents to remove their children from folding their stroller. I was the closing lead for this shift, and I had to head over to the other station just to check on how my coworkers were running things and, not slacking off. To my surprise, they weren't, but, that's not what this chapter is about. One of my coworkers told this dad to fold up the stroller before entering, but this genius father took it either literally or just was stupid and attempted to fold the stroller with his kid still inside. He then gave my coworker a dead look and was mad that he can't fold his stroller because his kid was still inside. Like, what the hell? Are you just that dense? This wasn't a bit, by the way. He wasn't trying to be funny or pull one on us. He legitimately got mad at my coworker because she made him fold up the stroller with his kid inside. He wanted to talk to her supervisor, which was technically me, and then he yanked his family out so I could talk to them off to the side. Basically, I had to tell this guy that it should be common sense to take your kid out before folding strollers. He wasn't happy, and he wanted to make sure that we tell everyone with the stroller to take their kid out before folding it, so something like this doesn't happen again. Yeah. He then told me to go fire my coworker for her incompetence, and I just said, you know what, I'll just go talk to her. The guy then left the station and didn't even end up writing. I ended up telling my coworker about what he said, and she sort of just laughed. This sort of thing should be common sense, but stupid is going to do what stupid does best. Be stupid. The guy ended up returning later in the night, and I made it a point to tell him that take his kid out before folding it, and he sort of just mumbled under his breath while he angrily took out his kid. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the stroller saga, and it's what we call main character syndrome. Just to reiterate, I understand having a stroller full of kids is hard work, and myself along with other coworkers were willing to help speed up the process when it came to loading and unloading the platform, which meant getting strollers off the platform. Well, time and time again, there was always that one family towards the end of the night that would take their sweet time getting their stroller all unfolded as they literally set up a picnic on the platform. Picnic meaning they literally had all their stroller crap laid out everywhere on the platform as they had their kid with a stupid weird name by their side. We would usually offer to help them out, but it was just met with them ignoring us because they were usually on their phone or pissed off about something that they were in their own little bubble, and the last thing that they wanted was a friendly cast member to help them out with the little things. They would literally set up their picnic of stuff, slowly put everything back, and then over the next 10 minutes, we were awkwardly standing there waiting for them to finish what they were doing. At the bare minimum, if you have a lot on your plate, just ask one of the cast members to help them out, or ask, them to put you on the other side of the gate. I can promise you that most of the cast members will help you out if you ask. Now, the next case of main character syndrome is when someone just wheels their stroller into the cabin without folding it, and then refuses to fold it by ignoring us, or is giving the excuse that they can't fold it because it's a rental or something stupid, I don't know. These guests were just as bad as they were doing it, usually in front of a full cabin, so other passengers can see them being a dick, and the amount of freaks given is zero to these people. Now, a language barrier wasn't really an issue, because most of us knew how to say fold your stroller in Spanish, which was, the second most common language at the resort behind English. Like, I know I'm white, but I've had to take 2 years of Spanish in college for my art degree for some reason. So I know the basic phrase of dobla tu cochito. Yeah, it's white, I know. Basically, guests would ignore us or take their sweet time folding up inside the cabin, mind you, because the mean old Monorail pilot made them follow the rules. Hey, remember how I said certain guests had that special tag on their stroller? Well, sometimes these main characters would get into the cabin for the wheelchairs, and they didn't want to fold their stroller because the person with the tag didn't have to. Then it was this whole can of worms where we had to explain it to them, and we're just getting cussed out for defending this person who literally had the exception to the rule. Now, I could go on and on about all the encounters that I had with strollers and but Florida lets us do this excuses, but I'm just going to end with this final pet peeve with strollers, and that's when guests angrily rip their stroller out of the cabin. Well, 9 times out of 10 when alpha bro Chad has to take out his toxic masculinity on the stroller and rip it outside the cabin, and ends up taking the door panel with it. Now, usually when this happens on accident, most guests, they would apologize, and trust me, it happens from time to time, so it's alright. The problem is when angry people accidentally bump it off and then get mad at us because, look at what you made me do! This causes delay in the operations because the maintenance team must come out and pop it back into place. That's why you might see the door panels all taped up and no one sitting in that cabin for a bit. Like I said, it's not a big deal if and when it does happen, but it's just inconvenient when they lose an entire cabin because Mundo over there had to hulk his stroller out of the cabin. Anyway, let's go ahead and keep this ball rolling and move over to wheelchairs, shall we? Wheelchairs. This is a subject that I'm sort of going to tread lightly with because I do understand that the Monorail is ADA compliant and allows wheelchairs to come on. I had no problem helping out wheelchairs or any other forms of transportation for those who needed it. Please do not take it the wrong way at all. The problem usually was other guests and how they treated those who had to use our special cabin. Just know that wheelchairs always get priority boarding in the 4th cabin, and it will cause a slight delay for other passengers who want to go towards the last 2 cabins. It's for both stations, by the way. I also want to make it clear that I did deal with some guests that were in a wheelchair that weren't the friendliest and did say some really offhand stuff towards us when we would help them out. This was usually from our boomer generation, so that might not come as a shock to most of you, but nonetheless, let's go ahead and get into this. Let's go ahead and tiptoe on some eggshells, shall we? There was this one day where I was loading an electric scooter into the train, and they were having a bit hard time getting into the train. We had a few people waiting to get into the cabin, but it was taking a bit longer than usual due to the person on the scooter just not having the best control over his vehicle. Well, this one guest basically walked onto our ramp as the guy finally made it into the cabin and screamed at me that if I didn't help out this cripple, he would have been on his way by now. He then grabbed his kids and ran up the ramp before I could get the chalk behind the guy's scooter. So now this dude and his family are awkwardly sitting in the cabin with the guy he just insulted, and the guy on the scooter just said, if I wasn't in this wheelchair, I would have kicked your ass for insulting a veteran, you piece of crap. The idiot that made that insult sort of just ducked his head down and faced away from him. Well, we finished loading this guy into the cabin and sent them on their way to the next station. Luckily, none of them did a round trip because I hate it when guests act like a dick and they have the balls to come back to the scene of the crime. The next story I actually told in my main cast member video about my 5 years with the company. Well, to give some more details on it, or tell it for those who didn't watch my 2-hour story, I was at the downtown Disney station and I was blocking the walkway to let the wheelchair ramp be down. We do this as a courtesy so people don't trip over the ramp, and trust me, it's happened all the time, but I'll get to that later. Well, the station was pretty full and I had to block off a small crowd of people to make sure no one else was interfering with the wheelchair boarding process. So this angry little man comes up and tries to pass me. I don't let him because, obvious reasons. This guy then screams in my face and cusses me out because I won't let him pass because I don't want him tripping or, interfering with the wheelchair that's trying to board. Well, after this guy was done with his little rage moment, I said to him very loud and clear, "Sir, next time you get that close to my face, I'm going to give you a kiss. You don't get that close to people's face unless you want a kiss." I could see his soul leave his body as the crowd laughed at my comment and he waddled his way next to the nearest cabin and sat down. I broke a man's masculinity that day, and boy was I proud of it. I can only imagine that this guy was all like, "Bro, I'm not gay, I wouldn't kiss a guy, that's gay, man," to himself, and I hope I really live rent-free in this guy's head, now to this day. This was a week before I was quitting, by the way, and I was already frustrated with all the guests that I dealt with before him in that day, so justice served, I guess. For illegal reasons, I obviously wouldn't have kissed that guy, and for personal reasons, I'm not gay myself, but nothing wrong with it in my eyes. Oh yeah, remember how I told you we block off the wheelchairs, loading so people would trip? Yeah, this did happen every once in a blue moon, where someone would blow us off and then trip over the wheelchair ramp, and the chaotic side of me was like, yeah, that's what you get for not listening, dummy, but the work side of me was like, great, now I gotta fill out paperwork because of you idiots. You get the idea with negative guests towards those who needed a wheelchair, but luckily, they weren't as common as you think. Majority of the time, guests were very polite and understanding when it came to wheelchairs, and the boarding process for them. Now, this is the part of the chapter where I'm saying I'm treading lightly because I did have a handful of guests that did use wheelchair devices and were part of the rude crowd, usually when we gave them directions or something in that ballpark. There was this one time where this older lady was in an electric scooter, and my Corley and I were helping her with the ramp and such. Well, I made this comment that she needed to make a slow, wide turn when coming onto the platform and up the ramp because the downtown Disney station sort of has a janky setup. Well, she screamed at me and told me to not tell her what to do as she cranked her setting from turtle speed to rabbit speed. To nobody's surprise, she sped around the corner, nicked the ramp, and fell off her scooter, and dislocated her shoulder. My correlator was like, "Welp, he told you not to do that," as he went to go, help her up. Next time, listen to directions or let us help you, lady. Jeez. Basically, it was usually old people making comments and their family apologizing for their offhand remark or something like that. Honestly, for the most part, wheelchairs were very common at the monorail, and we pretty much had a party with, every single flight. Yeah, there were some that were ruder than others and some guests rude towards them, but for the most of the time, it was just business as usual. The only downside that I do want to mention is when guests with those disabilities would loosen their bowels and we'd have to air out that cabin for a few cycles. That really brings up our next topic. All aboard the poop train! I'm just going to make it very clear that yes, I will be talking about poop, and no, it is not from guests that are wheelchair bound. I had 2 instances of dealing with fecal matter at the monorail, and this chapter is going to be talking about that. So if you don't like hearing stories about poop, well, now's a good time to use those timestamps. Let's start off with the first one. This comes a few weeks after we reopened, surprisingly, and I guess someone just let it all out in one of the cabins. Yeah, someone had an explosive dookie and got all over the cabin. Now, I understand that accidents happen, but if you saw what I did that day, you won't think it was an accident. You know those horror stories of those restaurant bathrooms and how it's covered from floor to ceiling with feces? Imagine that, but inside one of the Monorail cabins. This guy was in a cabin by himself and apparently had explosive diarrhea and it got everywhere. It was heavily indicated that this dude took off his underpants and just literally smeared it all over the cabin. It was all over the seats, all over the windows, all over the floor. Dude managed to even get it on the ceiling. It was like a freaking Jackson Pollock painting, but with number 2 as the paint and his fingers as the paintbrush. What the hell, dude? The only upside to the situation is that we weren't super busy and we were able to shut down for a good hour to get this mess cleaned up. I know I don't have to state this, but I feel like I should anyway. If you gotta go in your pants, just keep it in there. No one else needs to relive that sight, nor do the poor custodial cast members need to deal with that again. I am being a bit over dramatic on how much there was for entertainment purposes, but I'm not being dramatic about how this dude literally smeared his feces everywhere. It was disgusting, and it's going to make this next poop story seem sane compared to it. Yeah, number 2, am I right? This next story comes from my 3rd or 4th day signed off as a lead. I was just chilling and waiting for the next train to come in. Then I hear a radio call that I will never forget. My coworker said there was a man standing up in the cabin, but squatting with no pants on. This dude, I kid you not, apparently took off his pants, popped a squat, and let out that lumpy chocolate bar. Oh, by the way, he was in a full cabin. The insane part is that apparently everyone in that cabin knew each other and or were just in the same party because none of them questioned this dude. That or they were just mortified that this dude just needed to go. Well, this train made its way back to the station and sure enough, there was a nice lumpy Snickers bar sitting on that bench. The guy in question apparently said he needed to go and he needed to get out right now. I mean, when you gotta go, but at the same time, why on the seat? Why did you do it in a full cabin? Just why? I was at a loss for words. I didn't really know how to process it, and I didn't really know what to do in that situation. I unfortunately just let him go because he could just deny that he didn't take a duke and the rest of the people in this cabin didn't seem to care, nor did they speak a lick of English. The only thing that I could do was just call it to get cleaned up and let the poop go on a journey for a bit until we could, eventually get it cleaned up. The poop went on a round-trip journey 3 times before it was officially cleaned up. Don't worry though, I made sure no one could go in that cabin, but if you wanted to ride with Mr. Hanky, just let me know next time, okay? Like seriously, what's with people pissing and crapping on attractions? I get if you're a little kid or a baby, but a grown adult man shouldn't be dropping Lincoln Logs on the goddamn monorail. Let's just move on to a different topic, shall we? Thus concludes the poop chapter. Drunk idiots. Believe it or not, people somehow manage to get smashed at Disneyland. I get that alcohol can help relax people or whatever, but why get so wasted that you cause a ruckus? This next story comes from my last day of lead training, where we had some drunk guests come on the attraction. Obviously, one of the 2 stops is connected to Downtown Disney, and Downtown Disney is a place that serves liquor. That or these clowns had some stuff in their car, but I digress. The story begins at the Tomorrowland station. I was talking with my core lead who was telling me about the closing procedures and such, as it was a few hours before the end of the night. The orange train was about to come in and everything seems fine. The orange train rolls in and there's some guests standing in the 4th cabin. Naturally, like, hey folks, sit down till the train comes to a stop. Then out of nowhere, this dude starts punching the window, and I'm all joking like, whoa, hey, whoa. And this guy keeps doing it, and my core is like, hey, stop punching the window. The doors open, and Punchy McGee books it. Then out stumbles a drunk chick and another drunk dude that were just with the punchy guy. They followed him, and my core lead tells me to hold down the fort. I managed to play a bit of detective work and found out where these dipsticks were going. There were other passengers in their cabin, and they mentioned that they were going to Galaxy's Edge to get more drinks. I radioed my lead and let them know that this is where they were going. He managed to call security in the meantime, but he found one of the 3 drunk dummies. This dude that didn't punch the window split off from his party and went to go hide in the bushes near the Matterhorn. This guy jumped the fence actually and technically was now inside Autopia on the off-road section. Lucky for him, the track he was hiding near wasn't in operation. My lead basically got this dummy, and over on my end, the girl came back. She was upset that her boyfriend ditched her and that she forgot her phone on the train. Of course. Lucky for her, the guest that I played detective with gave it to me. Now, unlucky for her, security was actually following her and they ended up taking her with them. Now, it was the quest to find Punchy McGee, as the other 2 goons were captured already for being dipsticks. Apparently, Punchy McGee ended up making it to the Fantasyland bathrooms near the Red Rose Tavern and ended up passing out somewhere over there. I guess his liquid courage wore off because it finally hit him like a brick. All I know is that these 3 were escorted off property that night and probably aren't allowed back. Now, if you're wondering, there was no damage to the monorail windows, but it was just weird seeing some dude full on try to beat up a plastic window. Let's end this short little chapter with stating the obvious. It's okay to drink, but don't get piss drunk at Disneyland of all places. I mean, don't do acid or LSD, but that obviously wasn't my attraction, so that wasn't my problem. On top of that, Disneyland is a family place, and y'all coming up and acting like buffoons ruins the vibe of that place, it has. I'm assuming that those who are listening won't do any of this stuff ever, but I just want to make it clear on my end. Don't get drunk, or other things, at a theme park. It's trashy, it's stupid, and it's just like, really? Come on, man. Hot summertime. For those unaware of Southern California's climate and weather patterns during summertime, it gets pretty hot. So hot that the monorails have to shut down for excessive heat. Now, this isn't because they can't run in the heat, but just because they don't have air conditioner and the current model of trains. Adding on to that, a cabin full of people creates more body heat, causing the cabins to be 10 degrees hotter. And Fahrenheit, of course. I'm going to be using Fahrenheit for this video, so I do apologize for my viewers that use Celsius and that one weirdo who enjoys Kelvin. Basically, 85 degrees gets us to start checking the temperature of the trains, both full and empty cabins. Anything above 90 will get us to shut down the monorails for the day. Now, please don't go and harass the cast members if and when it does drop below these temperatures, because they still have to get the beam re-energized, get the trains, and do normal checks for reopening purposes. Plus, it's up to management at the end of the day too. Just know that they will get them when they get them. Anyway, as you can expect, we don't have a sign that says we're closed, but we do have people that stand there and tell guests to go away. So during the summertime, during these hot hours, we would stand there and give guests the bad news. Obviously, guests were upset, but rightfully so, because there's a fine line between getting upset and acting like a dick. It usually was guests taking their frustrations out on us and questioning why a multi-billion-dollar company can't put AC on some trains. Well, that's an excellent question, but not for someone at the bottom of the totem pole. Basically, it is what it is, and that's how it is, so get over it. It's more common knowledge now, but people still gonna be upset. I have this one story of a guy that didn't like my answer. This guy came up to me and was asking to get on. As you know, I told him the news and this dude was shocked. He started looking around and asked me if he was being pranked. He thought he was on some reality TV show where I pranked him. Like, bro, it's not a prank. Yeah, he thought it was, and he started to get agitated and he told me that the prank wasn't funny anymore and to tell him the truth. I then told him again that indeed I was not joking and that we were closed for excessive heat. That's when it finally dawned on him. He went from angry laughter to just angry. Like a light switch, he was furious. He started screaming at the top of his lungs and how cast members just get a kick on watching people like him suffer. He then proceeded to call me some words that, with his colorful vocabulary, and I sort of just stood there like, you done with your little tantrum yet? That's when one of my managers came out from the Nemo area and told him that he needs to leave because I already told him that we were closed. This dude then called my manager some colorful words, and my manager told him to take a walk with him. Bye-bye, idiot. The next story isn't exactly related to Monorail, but at our entrance area. Well, since we were all stationed to block off the entrance and exits, we were doing more around the land interactions than we normally do. This lady comes up to me and tells me that her mom passed out. I quickly walked over and radioed my coworkers to call the nurse over. I then started asking this lady some questions. Typical medical stuff. Then I asked what she's been drinking and eating all day. That's where I found out why this lady's mom passed out. Apparently, this lady's mom has only been drinking Sprite all day, and the only thing she ate was some popcorn and pretzels. Okay, well, I asked the important question, has your mom had any water today? The lady's response was, there's water and Sprite, so yes she has. She technically isn't wrong, but she technically isn't right. Luckily, by the time I was done questioning her, the nurse showed up and I just told her that she passed out from dehydration, and the nurse handled it from there. I know I shouldn't have to say this, but I saw it happen so many times at Disneyland during the summertime. Please stay hydrated and take shade breaks when you can. Also try to avoid salty foods and sugary drinks when it's hot. There were so many people passing out and the paramedics being called due to dehydration. During the summertime, we would hear radio calls go out every 10 to 20 minutes for paramedics responding to whatever place a guest had passed out. Let that sink in. At least 5 or 6 every hour. Drink water, even when it's not hot. Common sense is not common. This chapter is as it seems. The amount of, or lack thereof, common sense at Disneyland is astounding. While Monorail wasn't the busiest attraction in the park, it sure had some of the dumbest people in the park. Let's just start with listening to directions or what we are saying. I know cast members usually spiel about the attraction before you board, and I know not everyone may hear it as they're just showing up, but there's onboard audio that tells you exactly where the monorail is and where it's going and all that mumbo jumbo. The monorail isn't a magical express that takes you wherever you want it to. It's literally a train that on a singular rail that goes to downtown Disney and back to Tomorrowland. We say it, the attraction signage says it, and even the onboard audio says it. Now can you tell me why this idiot sandwich of a guest keeps asking me if it took him to Epcot? I kid you not, this one guy kept asking me if the monorail would drop him off at Epcot. Now I can tell you, no, he wasn't messing with me. He was dead serious. I told him a good 6 or 7 times that it does not. Well, he took it to downtown Disney and got off. I happened to be the driver for that train that he was on, and he looked at me and he goes, point at the old abandoned AMC theater, and he goes, Epcot? And I go, sure, and he went off on his way. I really wonder if he did find Epcot. The next story comes from Idiots That Stand. If you know theme parks, you know they love their safety spiels. And it's not because they want you to be safe, but just because they don't want to be sued for idiots being, well, idiots. The number of times I've had to stop a train because someone was standing was way too many. I'm not talking about children either. I'm talking about grown adults. It got to the point where I was on the intercom telling the grown adult man to sit down. This one guy claimed he got hit by a tree branch, and I even entertained the idea of riding exactly where he was sitting. To my surprise, there was a part of the tree branch that got pretty close, but only if you were standing and sticking your head out the window. Stupid games will result in stupid prizes. The next one isn't really common sense, but just common courtesy. The amount of rude some people had when riding is not moving over so new passengers can get a spot, or taking up the entire bench when it can fit a hypothetical 5. This even goes back to the Strollers thing and doing a round trip with them. Speaking of round trips, why do all the goddamn boomers want to do a round trip from downtown Disney back to downtown Disney? I swear, why buy a ticket to Disneyland if you only want to ride the monorail? At that point, why not just ride the ones in a city like Seattle or Las Vegas? The last thing I want to end with common sense is the Lightning Lane redemption here. Let me tell you straight up, do not use Lightning Lane at this attraction. 1, because it's usually a walk-on, and 2, even if it is busy, it will only get you first in line on the next train, but that still doesn't guarantee you a spot because you need to be ready to board when the train gates open. The amount of people trying to redeem it here, and I just say, why? Like seriously, why? The monorail technically is an attraction, but it's more transportation at the end of the day. Whatever, man. Just ending this chapter with this. Use common sense, follow the safety rules, and listen to the cast members. I guess all my previous stories can be applied to common sense at the end of the day too, but most guests that don't even know where they were going or what they were getting on, it's just common sense to read the room. Oh yeah, I guess use the app to see if it's open is a good one too. Let's go ahead and end this video with the final chapter about rotten, terrible kids. Bad kids. To kind of piggyback off the common courtesy one, I have a small story about a kid. The walls around Nemo were still up, and it was springtime at the monorail. I was down at the greeter area for the attraction, and this lady comes up to me, telling me that there's a bunch of ducklings over Nemo's queue area, and some of them are heading into the monorail exit. Well, I head over there, and there was just this kid with the ducks. He was about 7 or 8. Well, I thought, oh, he's just looking at them, but nope, he was trying to step on the ducklings. I was like, what the hell? And I told this kid to stop. He then did the typical kid thing at me by blowing raspberries at me. If you don't know what that is. I looked around, and then I found this kid's parents and told them what he was doing. Now normally you think, oh my god, Timmy, stop doing that. I wish that were the case. The mom told me with a straight face, it's Disneyland, he could do whatever he wants. Like, are you freaking serious, lady? I sort of just snapped and was like, no, you can't kill ducks. Get your kid away from them. She then rolled her eyes and went over to grab her kid. So now I had to sort of corral these ducklings back into the planter area behind the construction wall. That's when it happened. Mama Duck showed up. So I'm trying to get these ducklings behind the construction wall, and now Mama Duck is flying at me and trying to get at me because one of the few ducklings just couldn't make the jump into the planters. I then scooped up this duckling with my hat and put it into the planters. The Mama Duck then quacked at me angrily, and then they waddled off into the planter. Like, if anyone that duck should have attacked was that kid trying to stomp on her freaking babies. Shaking my head, dude. Anyway, this was a completely different day. I want to say a month or two before I actually left my job. I was at the greeter position again, and there was just some guest talking with me. I think she was asking me a question about the fireworks show or something, but that's not really important to this story. What is important is that this little 5-year-old kid was running around in the stroller area. Well, apparently, this kid was pissing on strollers. The only reason I found out is because he pissed on this other lady's stroller while she was getting her bag out. The only reason I knew is because I just hear a loud, "Ear, what the hell? Why are you pissing on my stroller?" Obviously, I removed some of the colorful language behind it, but you get the idea. Then, out of nowhere, this old grandma comes out of nowhere and apologizes in her very broken English for her grandson. This lady is very much upset, and then she flagged me down to do something about it. Well, I offered to get her some wipes or something, and that's when the kid, I kid you not, went back for seconds. This kid had the balls to pull down his pants and piss on the lady herself. First of all, what are the odds? And second of all, how much piss does this kid have stored in him? I then radioed my coworkers to call security as there was some foreign kid pissing on everything. The lady was outraged and she started to yell at the grandma. Of course, the grandma couldn't say anything because she didn't speak any English. So that was the equivalent of yelling at a brick wall. I felt for this lady. I really did, but the chaotic side of me was like, it's kind of just funny at this point. On top of that, why stay in the area? If some kid would try to piss on me twice, I would have dipped out. Well, security shows up after this lady is making a scene, and completely validated, of course, and they asked me what's going on. I told them that this kid was running around pissing on people and their stuff. Well, as you may know, comedy comes in 3, as this kid ran behind me where I was standing and took a piss on the light post where the Monorail sign is at. Yeah, the security cast member wasn't happy, and he had to get the translator on scene because none of us spoke what I believed to be was Mandarin or Cantonese, not 100% sure. By this point, the lady was talking to another security cast member and wanted my managers to show up to help prevent this kid from pissing on more stuff with his seemingly infinite bladder. And no, he didn't piss on any more things, and all I remember is that I had to go write what I witnessed, as that's how it be sometimes. So be careful, as kid piss bandit might be still on the loose at the Monorail entrance. Well, that wraps up my Monorail guest stories thing. Honestly, while I have a lot of stories from this attraction, as it was my home for 2.5 years, I work this attraction pretty much every day. A little too much, actually. I'm not going to get into it here, as I will cover what it was like to work my attractions in a future video. For now, I do apologize for being all over the place with this one. The next video will be actually the long-awaited Not Safe for Work one, and that's where I actually tell a lot of the good stories that I've been hiding, especially from this attraction. I will also be doing one more guest interactions video after that, and it'll be on the positive guests. Anyway, these videos will be coming out roughly every month or so, not to oversaturate my channel with Disney content. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it and want to help support my terrible channel, go check out some of my other content. I make various amounts of skits, films, and other series. I even have a new video game review show and other stories like this available in some playlists on my channel. I don't know, man. Thanks for watching and or listening to my cast member stories, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.